Today on Straight Talk Africa, efforts by the new government in Addis Ababa are underway to introduce major social and political reforms in Ethiopia. A discussion on the challenges and opportunities ahead in the Horn of Africa nation coming up next right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America headquarters here in Washington. I am Shaka Ssali. Today we are discussing the challenges of major social and political reforms in Ethiopia. Big changes are happening in Ethiopia. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has embarked on a series of reforms since taking office in April. He's tapped women to head top leadership positions. He's beginning peace deals and cracking down on corruption. But what does all this mean for Ethiopia? My colleague Wondimu has more on the story.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is generating worldwide headlines for pushing through reforms in a stark contrast to his predecessors.
Ensuring peace in Ethiopia is the government's main duty. One way of doing so is by addressing the potential conflict zones and ensuring lasting peace. The current conflict in Ethiopia must be resolved, but we are not worried they will jeopardize the ongoing reforms. The reforms were started by the people and are led by the people, so they will not stop.
Ahmed is from the majority Oromo ethnic group and was chosen by the ruling coalition, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, as its new leader. After 3 years of street protests and strikes, increased pressure on the party to reform and to achieve gender parity in government.
He is restoring rule of law in the country so that the Ethiopian people will have confidence in the system, in the judicial system, in the security system, and in the government as a whole.
In a historic move, the Prime Minister swore in Tsehai Publishers as the country's first female president. In Ethiopia, political power is wielded by the Prime Minister, with the president's role restricted to attending ceremonial functions.
Today, when I start my work as Ethiopian Federal Democratic President, I vow to fulfill my duties faithfully.
Nonetheless, Sahel's position carries significant and symbolic weight, social influence, especially for young women. Lawyer and women rights activist Blaine Sahilu says Abiy Ahmed is setting a foundation that is creating a free and fair environment for everyone to participate in politics.
If you want to sustain this level of representation, you're going to need more candidates, or you're going to just keep having the same 10 people or the same 20 people rotating in different places. But if you want new blood and new people joining in, new women joining from different lower levels of government as well, you need to make sure that this is a long-standing policy.
In another historic move, the Ethiopian parliament saw in Meza Ashnafi as the country's first female Supreme Court president. The appointment came 2 weeks after Abiy Ahmed named 10 female ministers to his cabinet. Earlier this month, the government launched a crackdown on senior government and security officials suspected of human rights abuses and corruption. Ethiopia signed a peace deal with Eritrea in July that ended 2 decades of hostility, leading to friendlier relations between Addis Ababa and Asmara, and boosting stability in the Horn of Africa. Since the signing of the peace agreement, commercial flights between the two nations have resumed, telephone communications have been restored, and perhaps most importantly, embassies reopened in their respective capitals. And the UN Security Council last week unanimously adopted a British-drafted resolution lifting the arms embargo, all travel bans, asset freezes, and targeted sanctions against Eritrea due to its warming relations with Ethiopia. Wondimu, VOA News, Washington.
Thanks, Paul, for that interesting report. And joining us here in Washington are our three distinguished guests. Negussie Mengesha, Director of the Africa Division at the Voice of America; Nunu Wako, Political Analyst; Kone Feseha, Member of the Ethiopian Dialogue Forum. And joining us from our studio in Los Angeles is Elias Wondimu, Publisher, Editor, and CEO of Tsehai Publishers. We also reached out to the Ethiopian ambassador to the United States, but due to scheduling conflicts, he could not join us today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host you on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
I'm going to be one of your guests, so you better treat me like a guest.
I will definitely treat you not only as a guest, but as a very, very valuable guest.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us from the City of the Angels, Elias Wondimu.
Thank you so much for having me, Brother Shaka.
You're most welcome. It's a very long time since we last interacted.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Let me come to you immediately, Negussie. This time, of course, as not my boss, but as my guest, valuable guest. You landed at the international airport in Addis Ababa.
Bole
International Airport. Beautiful structure.
Totally new for me.
What were your feelings like, really?
Oh my goodness. The Bole I know is a very small airport actually. This has expanded, it's large, renovated. And also when I got in, definitely, I really had, I hardly slept even on the plane because I had so much anxiety, nervousness. Most of my relatives I'm going to meet, I don't know them even. Most of them I'm meeting them the first time. Mind you, I'm going the first time in 37 years.
37 years.
37 years. So everything has changed. The Bole road actually to the city, it used to be 2 lanes. One car going this direction, the other one coming the other direction. It's about actually it has really become large road. I couldn't even know it. I asked the driver, is it the same old road? He said, yes, it has expanded. It's been built. The buildings, I don't know. I don't know any landmark actually when I went to the city. So it was really like a strange man in a strange city, even though I grew up and went to school there, started my career there.
What particularly surprised you, given that the last time you actually tried to enter your homeland, you were not allowed in?
Yes, actually I requested 5 times a visa. I was denied. And then also, I think in the 1997 election, when the violence erupted, and many of the opposition leaders have been arrested, about 120 of them, those the coalition leaders. I think I've been also among the 5 members of VOA Amharic service. I have been the one charged also for perpetuating genocide from Washington or inciting conflict in the country. Wrong thing. I was not even on air during that time. But thanks to the intervention of the State Department, that charge has been dropped. So, I mean, it's an amazing, it's also a country, a government which was jamming our program, Amharic program, continuously. So coming there now, really is a sort of, I call myself a rebirth of myself actually. So like I'm reborn actually. Mind you, as I told you, I was not able to see my mom's funeral, my dad's funeral. So I went to see the burial site. Emotionally, it was of course very draining. At the same time also I saw my sisters, cousins, nephews and nieces. My goodness, most of them I don't even know them, so it's heartbreaking. But at the same time also I was really joyful, very happy. And that's a personal level. But professionally also we are able to train 27 stringers, 13 from Somalia, 14 from Ethiopia. We used to have only 2 stringers in Addis, and also one stringer in Mekelle. We have now 14 throughout the continent. So we taught them actually to be multimedia qualified journalists who can produce content for radio, television, and social media. That was extremely good. I took a really efficient and skillful trainers from here. We are a total of 6 of us. We are also have now the opportunity, we might open a reporting center in Addis Ababa. But the highlight of my visit was, of course, the call we got from the Prime Minister's office to visit him. So on October 22nd, to be honest, I couldn't believe it, that he could have time for us because his plate seems to be full. And we went to his office at 9 a.m. in the morning. We spent about, with the managing editor, Tsehai Publishers, of the Horn of South Africa Service, we spent about an hour and 20 minutes with him. Off the record background briefing. It was really very interesting.
What kind of person is Abiy Ahmed, really?
This is the first time I met him, actually. I didn't know him before. I know him, of course, as the new Prime Minister. I have been following his speech. Unfortunately, when he came to visit the diaspora, also, I was out of the country. I went with the director, Amanda Bennett, to the two Congos and Nigeria. I didn't have the chance to meet him. It was the first time I met him, actually. He's a very impressive person. Down towards, extremely polite, hospitable. Actually, when we went in, he just hugged us. And he knew that I had been away close to 40 years. I think I was away maybe over 20 years. Mm-hmm. So he was really very humble, also very candid, very open. And he seems to be quite well-read, well-informed. He seems, normally when you meet head of states, I have met several of them. You meet them for 15, 10 minutes. You have a talking point, you shake hands, go out. He sat down over 1 hour with us. And he was very candid to tell us also the challenges he's facing. Normally, head of states, when they take that chair, they say, we're under control, there's no problem. No, he really admits there are problems, big challenges, he's going to face them. But he says also we are going to overcome those challenges. There's no doubt about that. He seems to be quite determined, okay, energetic also at the same time, but also very charismatic, a very wonderful person, actually. After we finished talking to him, he took us around, and actually the Prime Minister's office was renovated. He showed us, actually. We said, would you mind walking through the dust? I told him, Prime Minister, if you walk through the dust, believe me, I will do it also. I can clean it later. So we went throughout, and he gave us some briefing, actually, orientation about the new renovation of the Prime Minister's office.
Back to you, to your human experience. I have read, for example, that there are a lot of people that when they first go to Ethiopia, when they land at that airport, they immediately go down and kiss the ground, the soil. And one of those, in fact, was a Ghanaian founding president.
Yes.
They were searching for Kwame Nkrumah.
And
another one, Jomo Kenyatta.
Jomo Kenyatta did also, yeah.
The founding president of Kenya.
I didn't go down to, maybe I'm an old age, so I didn't go down to kiss the ground. But believe me, it was overwhelming. I was so happy. Every morning when I opened my window where I stayed, I say, oh my goodness, I'm in Ethiopia.
Really?
I couldn't believe it, yeah, to be honest. It's so overwhelming, actually. And I was so happy and thrilled. And by the way, also, one thing very important is, mind you, I told you before, this was a program that has been jammed before. This was a government before which really didn't want VOA. But VOA is big in Ethiopia. Extremely big in Ethiopia. We went out and visited a number of television outlets, radio outlets, private and government. They are all ready to be actually affiliated with the Voice of America.
What makes Voice of America big or huge in Ethiopia?
The impact it is making. By the way, just we got a research now. Actually, we are having 13 million weekly listeners in the whole of Ethiopia in the 3 languages. Mind you, now when we use our network stringers reporting on this new development, the new reforms also, I think we'll have a big role in building democracy in that country.
What do we need to do in order to do really much better? You're talking about 13 million. We're talking about a population of about 105 million human beings.
I think we should have like an audience like in Nigeria. We have 20 million weekly audience. That could happen in Ethiopia, given the new structure now. Also, by the way, the Prime Minister is a big on free media outlet, actually. He's a strong believer. He said, you'll get every help. As a matter of fact, he said, you don't need to train your own reporters. They seem to be well trained. He actually said, train our own people on the ground, which we are ready to do that also. But also the Ethiopian television, the Ethiopian radio station, and other private stations, they are willing to get affiliated. So our content will be all over, actually, in Ethiopia in the near future.
Very interesting, very interesting. You are, of course, welcome back home, away from home.
Thank you, John.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
What about you, Nunu?
Well, you know, for me, it's a different experience because of my line of work. I've always been in and out of Ethiopia, and I've always been engaged to a certain degree with the previous regime, even though it wasn't on the same page. My views drastically differed from the previous regime, of which Dr. Abiy, took over. As a young, educated Ethiopian who invested my educational career learning about a country that I didn't have the opportunity to grow up in, because probably similar situations, my father had to also exit Ethiopia, become an exiled individual, raise us in the United States. So growing up, we looked in, not realizing what the realities are on the ground. But as an adult, doing work in the political arena, I actually got to also experience what it's like to be an Ethiopian living in Ethiopia from two ends of the spectrum. As a person who grew up very free, independent, empowered to voice my opinion as I see it, and as a oppressed individual when I'm there because I'm so afraid.
Did you feel as you walked the streets of Addis Ababa that you are back home and that you are basically walking on the land of your ancestors and you're in charge?
Absolutely. I think I actually did, get down on my knees and kiss the ground the first time I did go to Ethiopia, because there's that heavy burden that gets lifted off of you, just being able to step on the ground that you were born on but didn't have the privilege to grow up in. And so that feeling is tremendously overwhelming, and it's such a surreal feeling to be in Ethiopia. You hear about it all the time, and here's this country that's unconquered, has an impeccable history that is unparalleled by anyone.
Unconquered, except very briefly during the Second World War. You know what the Italians under Mussolini did in Ethiopia.
Yes, very short period. So, it didn't have much impact on Ethiopia and being an Ethiopian. So yes, it's a very overwhelming feeling, and to be a young Ethiopian in this moment today
This is your moment.
It's powerful, yes.
Well, what about Kone?
My experience was mixed. I was there about 5 years ago, and still the repressive government was leading the country. So the people were not free. There were political dissidents in jail. There was political repression. There was not that much freedom for the press. So as a guest to the country, I was witnessing, there is a joy going back to your country, but still you feel sorry for the lack of, human rights. Public opinions were censored. People were in jail. The economy was mismanaged, and you see that was the time you see a lot of issues within the country, but now it is totally different.
Totally different.
Yes, it is. It's on the right path. It's the way to go. We are heading to the right direction. The people are behind the leader. He has a good vision for the country. We don't know how fast he should go and what should be the speed of the reform should be, but we are very, very satisfied how it goes now.
Do you get the sense that what is going on right now could probably amount to a game changer?
Well, a game changer would be for the Prime Minister to establish independent institutions. So that should be the game changer. There is corruption, there is economic mismanagement, there were political crimes. How can we change that? not through a single leader, but I suggest the Prime Minister to focus on establishing independent institutions that will last for decades. That way, he can place, a very solid foundation for the country. So that's what I'm hoping he will do as a game changer.
Talking about building institutions, you know as well as I do that so far, at least they have arrested 79 very big key officials.
Right, yep.
Do you get a sense that those people will get due process? Is there, for example, what you would consider to be an independent Ethiopian judiciary?
Well, the Prime Minister has been on power for about 7 months, so we don't expect independent institutions overnight. But we are in transition. There are a way to change the independent judiciary who was taking action, appointing attorney generals, somehow independent, but we're not to the level of the Western democracy where you have an independent judiciary institutions. But for a transition, I'm sure they will get due process for justice.
What you've noticed up to now, actually before people are arrested and investigated, I think they have been doing investigation for the last 5 months, which is a good thing. Once they establish there is enough evidence to place a charge, they were arrested. And also for the arrest, they must have the warrant. Actually, they did not arrest anybody without warrant, according to the report we saw. That's one thing. By the way, an important thing, what I noticed, I just somehow looked over to tell you, the country is very young. While I was really driving from the airport to the city, everywhere I was looking people of your age and my age, I could not see any.
So they're basically, you're talking about changing the demographics.
It's like below 29 up to 70%. The young. So, and your program also should direct, actually, focus, target the young in Ethiopia. And the rest of Africa, of course.
Very interesting. So as you walk to the streets downtown Addis Ababa, could you recognize any particular individual?
No. Except those who came to visit me. I saw Elias, he came to Mr. Blue, from my friends, yeah. Some of older cousins and sisters, a couple of them. Actually, 3 sisters I know, 3 of them I don't know them. It's the first time I met. No. If I walk to the city of Addis Ababa, I hardly see someone I know on the street. No.
That sounds like me in 1986,
in Kampala,
when I first walked downtown Kampala, after 10 years of staying in the United States. I couldn't actually recognize any particular individual.
But Shaka, just to chime in on that question that you asked about, would they be receiving a due process? Yes, they would be receiving a due process. It's a new dawn in Ethiopia, with Maaza Ashanafi at the helm of the judiciary system of Ethiopia. If there's anybody that's going to ensure that these individuals...
The distinguished lady.
She's very distinguished. And she's very serious about upholding the Constitution, the laws of the land, making sure that everybody deserves the right process in terms of receiving, justice. Just because they are investigated and assumed to be guilty, that doesn't mean that they are guilty. The term innocent until proven guilty does apply in today's Ethiopia. And so, yes, they will get a due process. And some of them have actually, absolutely, some of them have said that they don't have the capacity to, have a lawyer represent them. So the country is going to, give them a lawyer to defend them. So yes, I think for the first time in Ethiopia's modern history, due process will be executed.
Talking about fairness, let's try to be fair, as a matter of fact, by bringing in Elias from Los Angeles. Elias.
Thank you, Shaka.
Walk us through your particular emotional experience that you just went through a couple of weeks ago.
My experience is very similar to Negussie, and
you guys were staying in the same hotel.
Actually, we were not in the same hotel, but I was in the hotel that he was staying for a meeting, and I happened to see him, and it was quite wonderful to connect with him in Ethiopia. And I went to Ethiopia after 24 years of life in exile here in the US. And as a former journalist, an exiled journalist for that, I was not able to go back to Ethiopia because of what has happened in Ethiopia, what has transpired in Ethiopia. As you remember, Ethiopia was one of the 10 worst enemies of the press for many years, for a few decades actually. And what has entailed is that more than 250 journalists was exiled from Ethiopia. And those who were in Ethiopia were not able to practice freedom of expression as it was foretold in the constitution. And so because of those circumstances and the activism that I was engaged in, the human rights, especially the freedom of the press issues, I was not able to go. And I traveled extensively in the continent, but every time I go there, back to the continent, be it Nigeria or South Africa or Kenya, I always felt at home. Because of what was happening in the government, in the Ethiopian political landscape, I feared that I will never be able to go back to Ethiopia. And the fear was very strong. And so the anxiety was very, very big for me just to go back home. And I really didn't felt that it was true until, a few weeks in Ethiopia. And it was the most humbling experience I have had in my life. And it was the wonderful gift that I was given to be able to connect with my people. Ethiopia is dynamic, as I always think it was. Yes, it's 70% of the generation is young. And most of them I haven't even my own families, as Negussie said, that I don't know most of my own relatives, let alone the people in general. But to be in the midst of them and to feel that you are at home is just the most important gift that Dr. Abiy and his visionary leadership and Team Lemma, as they called the group, gave us. And I think I will always be grateful, and many of my colleagues and friends who were in exile for the last 3 decades and more for that are grateful for this transition and for this selfless, dedicated, visionary leadership that they have shown us. And so I'm really humbled for this opportunity.
Elias, given what we have seen so far and what you have experienced, and some of the people that you were able to interact with back in Ethiopia, would it be fair to say that under the new Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, we forget that he's also, by the way, a Lieutenant General in his own right. Would it be fair to say that we are probably looking at a game changer here?
It is a game changer. Actually, it is a game changer not only for Ethiopian politics, but for Africa. I had several conversations with many of my African colleagues here and back in the continent. And what I am hearing is that Dr. Abiy's way that he came to office is empowering most of the young leaders in business, in government, and in politics. So this sense of entitlement when we in Africa, that when we take office, that not allowing other people to come, and I think the most destructive thing that's happening for the continent. And I think while we're talking about Dr. Abiy, another person that we shouldn't forget is that the former Prime Minister Haile Desalegn, as much as that his tenure was clouded with corruption and human rights abuse, political instability, but for him to, in a way he did, is just for him to leave office really opened Ethiopia as J.J. Rowling's tenure ending, and when he left Ghana's presidency to the people who followed him. So I think we have to be grateful for what has happened at that moment, even though it's a public protest and political instability that brought to that fact. But he could have stayed and he could have continued to kill and imprison and force us to really go down in a civil war situation. But he left office opening the opportunity for this. So I think Dr. Abiy's leadership is not only for Ethiopia that is changing the game, but also for the continent, especially the way he brought together countries in the Horn of Africa in a way that he's engaging the entire continent and pushing for a way of unity that we have never seen, in a way of bringing the continent, as Emperor Haile Selassie did, in many ways than one. So I think these are things that we have to be cognizant of, and I think definitely it's a game changer for the continent as a whole.
Well, unfortunately, Elias, time is not our best ally. You are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of our discussion in a moment. So please don't go away, because we'll be right back with you.
Voices, we're talking about the news and issues you're talking about.
Sharing stories of development and growth across Africa,
Around the world and in our lives.
Topics that inform, empower,
and change the rules.
It's time for Our Voices.
With me, Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick.
And Hadiza Kiari.
And Ayan Bior.
And Orion Itangi Shaka.
Join us on Facebook at VOA Our Voices.
It's time for Our Voices.
Today's youth are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them, today, not tomorrow. So let's connect, let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. Innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Upfront every Wednesday, 17:30 UTC, right here on the Voice of America.
A reminder that we appreciate all of the audience feedback. Straight Talk Africa streams live every Wednesday on Facebook. And you can also watch us live on your mobile device. Just download the VOA mobile app. Now, let's look at what's on tap for next week's program.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, general elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo are scheduled for December 23rd. The vote will determine a successor to longtime President Joseph Kabila. Several leading opposition figures have been disqualified from the ballot, raising questions about the election's fairness. Unrest persists in eastern Congo, in addition to an Ebola outbreak in North Kivu province. What's at stake in the DRC? On the next Straight Talk Africa.
Negussie, when you look at the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, we're talking about Lieutenant General, retired but certainly not tired.
He's a colonel, actually.
And doctor. He has really faced a lot of problems so far, in the sense that at one time he was almost assassinated. There was an assassination attempt on his life. Yeah. You are getting resistance from the TPLF. This is the group that seized the power back in 1991 and formed what is currently the government. What does he do? What does he have to do in order to negotiate around this? Use the advantage of the fact that the entire country seems to be actually behind him.
Yeah. I think one thing you could see is the commitment. Actually, Dr. Kone mentioned about the democratic institutions. He says there's no other choice but start building democratic institutions. He says actually we'll go to for the election in about a year and a half, I think. He said definitely we'll have an independent electoral commission, totally independent. They're not attached to the government or ruling party.
How will it be chosen?
That I don't know the process. To be honest, I didn't ask him the detail, but I think that's going to happen. He's big on the media outlet, the role of the free media, in enlightening people, also giving a chance to every political actor who is going to run for election, give them access. He's big on that one, actually. Mind you, he emerged out of the ruling party itself. He didn't bring his own party. That is the challenge he's facing, one. The other thing, the positive thing I see is actually people love him. I have never seen a leader within the last 7 months, in 7 months, to get so much affection and love. And the support is, I don't know, over 90%. I don't know if there is any polling, but really it's huge. I go among my family members, friends, acquaintances, new friends I met, everybody adores him, actually.
No, it's
Very
amazing
supportive.
because when you walk around here, meeting the various individuals forming the Ethiopian diaspora, I mean, the guy could even win the election right here.
Now, you remember the role of the Ethiopian diaspora has been for many years, since the last 27 years, since 1991, opposing actually any government official who came here, including the late Prime Minister Meles. People went out to demonstrate. The first time the entire diaspora has been galvanized, united to give him a support. I have never seen any African leader who got this kind of support. 35,000 people in the convention center, 15,000 in Los Angeles, another 10 to 12,000 in Minneapolis. That's huge. By the way, we were able to air it live on Ethiopian television. We offered the live streaming of the convention speech in the Ethiopian television. That's a big thing we have done. So that support, he has it. But at the same time also, I told you, that I think the biggest time bomb I could see, I don't know, you might agree with this one, is the unemployment. The youth.
The youth.
Yeah, that scares you. Whether you walk in Addis, outside Addis, you see youth actually on the street. Unemployed.
Unemployment.
Most of them also with education.
Yes.
College graduates.
Yes.
High school graduates. That is scary. I think one of the most important, actually, priority for the Prime Minister's government is really to start opening up a job for people. He's going now to inaugurate, I think, a big mall is going to be built in Addis Ababa. I'm told
recently it has been announced that a UAE-based development.
I hope that enterprise will be a job creator enterprise, actually. That's one big area I see. The other problem I see also, this is a sporadic ethnic conflict. There is a problem between the Somalis and the Oromos, a problem around Oromo with the Benishangul, Benishangul, the Amhara region. There is a problem actually bordering with the Tigray region, the Walqaites, and also Salamt areas, actually, which have been part of Tigray. These are unresolved problems. So he's facing a lot of internal problems, actually. So I don't know where to start. Well, sometimes when you see it, it's very scary. But when you talk to him, to be honest, he seems totally determined, committed to it. And he strongly believes that there is no other choice but to succeed with this reform. That's what I read, actually. That's what I understood when I talked to him.
Does he give you the sense that he has the support of his colleagues in the EPRDF, which is made up of, are they 5 different parties which are, which make up a coalition?
Yeah.
I think the ASA conference actually is the one who elected him now to this position. He got almost 100%.
Right.
Right.
What that vote means, I really don't know.
But
how many
TPLF seems to think something different
actually,
right now.
No, well, I mean, I think in that conference, actually, if you see, he got the vote almost 176, I think, out of 177. The only vote that he didn't get his own vote, I think everybody voted for him.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, but Shaka, we can't sit here and deny that there is a power struggle. Definitely. When you have been the only sole ruling ethnic group for 27 years and quietly, suddenly you have been, stripped of that entire power.
Ethnic group, but obviously one of those small ethnic groups in Ethiopia.
Absolutely.
We're talking about, is it somewhere around 6% of the population?
They are 6%, yes. They make up 6% of the Ethiopian population. However, when they came into power, they were the elite of the EPRDF. They created that coalition. So as the godfather to the coalition, you also dominated each and every sector of Ethiopia and how Ethiopia was to be managed, developed, ruled, functioned, how people were to speak, talk, eat. And then here is an individual who grew up in the system. He joined the coalition or, the efforts of overthrowing Derg when he was 15 years old. Yes, when he was 15 years old. So, of course, as a political analyst, I can't sit here and tell you, no, there is not a power struggle. There is a power struggle, and it's very difficult for a very reformist prime minister who sees the bigger picture. He's such a visionary. His vision is so grand that not only would it build and stabilize Ethiopia, the Horn of Africa, but the continent of Africa. That is how big of a visionary he is. And yes, he is internally struggling in terms of power and control and how to push Ethiopia forward when it comes to him and the TPLF group.
Elias seems to want to jump in. Let's give Elias an opportunity to jump in, please. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I think one very important thing that we have to remember, especially when we talk about what is happening, the time bomb that we see exploding, these regional ethnic conflicts, is that in 1991, when EPRDF was allowed to come in, before that, there was a London conference, as you remember, and in the London conference, what was done by Undersecretary Herman Kone at that particular time was that the national political parties was pushed out of the negotiation and even allowed to take part in the transitional government. The Ethiopian People's Democratic Party, the Medhen Party, the Ethiopian Workers' Party, even though they had the representative of that party, which was the former government, was in London to take part in that conference. But what Herman Kone has done, or the American government of that time has done, is that they empowered the TPLF, the Tigray Liberation Front, the Oromo Liberation Front, the Eritrean Liberation Front, to take over the government in Ethiopia. And that excluded the national parties from taking part in that transition. And that transition created a very ethnicized federal system that it created this mess that we have been living with for the last 27 years. So sometimes I think it's very important to see other international players in our own political lives. And I think what the new government is dealing with is that this ethnicized self for the last 27 years has created an identity that exclude others while it embraces its own needs and interests. And in Ethiopian history, I think we have had a parallel situation that put us in a war for almost 100 years, the Zaman Masafint. And so I think we are struggling with that. And with those kind of historical backgrounds, we have a lot to carry forward. The way to go about it is that we need to find a way, a balanced way of dealing with each other, and we have to rewrite our narratives that could help us to coexist and continue the 3,000 nationhood that Ethiopia enjoyed. And of course, as a big computer, as a system, I think our software, our current mindset has been corrupted, so we may need to reset the whole system by deleting or bringing a new or historical identity that we're proud of as Ethiopians. So I think that's one of the things that I think that needs to be happening.
Very interesting, Elias. We should point out, by the way, that Ambassador Herman Cohen was, in fact, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs and not Undersecretary. Now, let me come to you, Kone.
Okay.
Ethiopia, from what I have read, from the little I know about Ethiopia, that great country, Ethiopia, the country that won against the Italian invasion, yeah? The Battle of Adwa. From the little I know, it has never experienced even one moment of democracy.
It's true.
It has been under emperors. It has been under kings, under dictators, and what have you. What do you think needs to happen, needs to be done sincerely, in order to bring about that type of environment, an environment that enables the people of Ethiopia at least to enjoy a semblance of democracy?
Yeah, in fact, in the past 40, 50 decades, there was a struggle to bring democracy and change to the country, but we were not lucky. So during the Derg, it was a dictatorship, followed by the TPLF, who came to the country and promised a new kind of democracy, but it wasn't, because they told us they are coming with revolutionary democracy, which was totally against the democracy, but it was a kind of tyranny, a repressive organization. So what they did was the chance for Ethiopia to build institutions that could transition the country into a democracy were destroyed in the past 30 years. There was no independent justice, there was no free media, the economy was mismanaged and funneled to supporters of TPLF. There were enormous political crimes committed against the country. So this is a moment now. The Prime Minister Abiy understands the problem very well. He came to the Ethiopian people and he spoke to the diaspora and to everybody. The country is in trouble. What has been done in the past 30 years was a crime. So he knew that. So that's why majority of Ethiopians are behind him, because he understands the problem. Now, what should we do? We want to support Prime Minister Abiy. We want to be behind him so that he can build independent democratic institutions. We need a reform to the Constitution. The Constitution was written by TPLF. There is a flaw in it. The way the federal boundaries were created, it is undemocratic. It is ethnic based. It is not based on individual rights. It is based on a group right that gives a right to a specific ethnic group that is creating this internal displacement issues. There is a war these days between Somalis and Oromos. There is a conflict between the Amharas and the Benishanguls because the TPLF created this ethnic boundary which tells the people, this is your land, this is your nation. So the notion of Ethiopia as a country was attacked in the past. Now, Prime Minister Abiy understands this well, but there is a challenge. How can he bring the country, Ethiopia as a country, instead of nations based on smaller ethnic groups? That is a big challenge. The second point is, how can he address those economic mismanagement? The country was taking $10 billion a year from China as a loan. That's on top of the World Bank and other Western donors. That money was misappropriated. The country doesn't have a rule on how a contracting procedure. There is no ethical values or ethical principles. The money was funneled into TPLF generals. This is what we are witnessing now. Now, Prime Minister Abiy understands the problem. He's taking action, but how far he can go to bring those institutions? We need institutions more than one single prime minister. We need institutions to be behind him, to support him. We need justice institutions. We need the defense to be independent. We need the police force to be trained and independent. All of these are issues that need to be addressed, but Ethiopia has a bright future with Dr. Abiy. We will definitely get to the point.
Very interesting. Nunu, there are some people who will say, well, Abiy has a chance because, after all, he comes from a region that is the single largest community in Ethiopia, that he has a chance. But what about the other force that is under this group called Oromo Liberation Front, who pretty much seem to be actually looking for some kind of secession? Have they changed their mind?
You know, that relationship is a very complicated relationship, and a relationship that the Abiy administration, along with the Oromo region President Tsehai Publishers, that they are really taking their time and working through that relationship. Just recently, they have signed a peace agreement where the ONLF will lay down their arms. I believe their troops are supposed to be integrated into the military of Ethiopia, as well as the regional Oromia police force. With that relationship, my hope is...
The other one, the Oromo National, no, the Ogaden National Liberation Front.
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you.
But
yes.
yeah, that's OLF. Okay.
With OLF, it's a complicated relationship because of the fact that, you know, OLF has been a militia group, quote unquote, for a very long time. They've been struggling to secede from Ethiopia and separate Oromo from the internal parts of Ethiopia, but where do you go when you do that? You still need to be able to deal with your neighbors, whether it is the Amaras or the Tigris or the Beshanguls or the nations and nationalities. Ethiopia cannot be Ethiopia without the Oromos, and Oromos cannot be Oromo without Ethiopia. So they need to come to a common consensus where both the Abiy administration and the ONLF could win. And Abiy has opened up the platform where they could register as a political party. Should they see that they are the better party to lead Ethiopia, then people will vote for them. But you know what? No one party can lead Ethiopia without being an inclusive party. In today's Ethiopia, everybody wants to be one. They want to be united. They want Ethiopia to be a state where everybody lives cohesively. And right now, unfortunately, we're witnessing, you know, residual impacts of the TPLF-led federally divided and conquer situation that happened in Ethiopia. But
in fact, talking about TPLF, the name of Bereket Simon comes to my mind. Because the last time, in fact, I had him on this show, he actually dropped the phone on me. Bereket Simon. That is very interesting because his boss, Meles Zenawi, at one time actually called this show from Addis Ababa, live, trying to help his ambassador to the United States about the issue regarding Badme. Where is Bereket Simon?
Quite frankly, I have no idea where Bereket Simon is. He's been very silent. I have no idea where he is, but I think what would be best for the TPLF to do with the current situation in Ethiopia and the political paradigm shift is to join the boat. You cannot sail by yourself and continue to be a viable party if you feel that what is happening for Ethiopia is the incorrect and accurate direction, when it's truly the most tangible and correct path that Ethiopia has taken in a long time.
And especially given that Ethiopia and Eritrea are now good brothers and sisters.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think that that is the best thing that happened to the region. That is the best thing that has happened to Ethiopia. It was economically draining, not to mention all of the casualties that were, you know, losing their lives. And for Ethiopia, this allowed for us to be able to, you know, build a better integrated economic opportunities. Now, we're not only going to have access to the port of Assa, but we're also going to have access to ports in Djibouti. That's building Ethiopia's economy in the most possible way. And same goes for Eritrea. For a very long time, you know, they've been isolated from the rest of the world. The sanction has definitely crippled the economy of Eritrea, but with this relationship being mended and the sanction being lifted, I think Eritrea will also see a brighter future.
Let me ask you a
think,
question.
you know, actually, the last 27 years has brought so many things. We are here now with a structure of federation, ethnic-based federation. Whether we like it or not, it's there. Some people like it, some people don't like it. I think that the Prime Minister was right when he said he will create a commission to study these burning issues. The question of federation, the question of land issue, the question of language might come also at stake. So there are certain areas which really you need to sit down, invite experts, scholars who know the subject matter, sit down, discuss with them. That's not what happened 27 years ago. It was simply a political decision. But here, actually, you go and see. At the same time, we say, now, I don't think secession is a big deal now, to be honest. People want to stay with one united Ethiopia. That's my understanding. Yes. I mean, some might have still that objective, but I don't think that's a big issue. But the question is now political representation, control of resource, and so forth. So once you start democratization, okay, once you go building democratic institutions, I think all this will be included. Will be solved, I think so. But at the same time also, one should make it clear that this change is not against any ethnic group. It's not against Amhara, it's not against the Oromo, it's not against the Tigrayans. People are being arrested
against injustice.
Against injustice.
Yes, exactly.
Mismanagement and corruption also. Because you see, going against any ethnic group is the worst recipe in the continent of Africa. We have seen it in the case of Rwanda, we have seen it in Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Nigeria. Somalia is struggling to be a nation. So we don't want to go through that way. Actually, the diversity of this country is beauty, it's wealth.
You are in fact the oldest free nation on the African continent.
100 million people, it can have another 300 million people.
Exactly.
There is a lot of resources actually, and a lot of skilled manpower actually. So what we need to do is actually, to be honest, people have to come to the drawing board and try, maybe talk about the constitution also. The constitution, do we need to amend this constitution also? If that is required, it should be amended also. It's a process. But sometimes also people are nervous. They want to see results tomorrow.
Right, no.
This Prime Minister only 7 months yet.
It might just take 27 years.
Let me go to Los Angeles to Elias, please. Elias, tell us a bit about the prophetess, the mother of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Apparently, she did predict at one time that this young man who was 7 years old would someday become the 7th ruler of Ethiopia. Any truth in that?
You know, many kids are told many things, but to hear what he was told and to believe it and to live that is just an incredible story that he told when he accepted the prime ministership. When his mother told him that he's going to be the next ruler or king at that time, was that he believed it, and by believing that story, I think he became a prince, a king in waiting, in a way that when you see what he has done in the past 7-8 months, it's just incredible how methodical he is and how everything is thought through carefully. The people he selected, the people he worked with, how he reacts to issues.
You have 30 seconds, unfortunately. Is that the reason why he is perhaps empowering women?
Absolutely.
That is also exactly a point. And he was our king in waiting, and I think we are very lucky to have him for our prime ministership. And there's a lot that we wait from him, but at the same time, we're not waiting, but at the same time, we're participating to be a part of the solution, not a problem.
Definitely.
Thank you very much. What about Kone? You had something to say before we...
I was to add something on what Negussie said earlier. This was regarding about the root cause of the problem. What is, unless we find the root cause of the country's problem, what brought the country 30 years into this big problem, we need to address the root cause of the problem. Unless we address that root cause of problem, the federal structures, the constitution, the mismanagement of resources, unless we address the root cause, the future to democracy will be difficult. So what I advise the new change leaders is, what is the root cause of the problem? What is the main problem within the constitution that creates divisions among people, that causes millions of displacement in Ethiopia? So what is the reason? Why the generals went into this
Unfortunately,
corruption?
Kone, time happens not to be our best ally. There's no democracy in Studio 47. When the producer says go, you have to go.
Thank you.
On that note, thanks to our guests, Negussie Mengesha, Director of the Africa Division at the Voice of America, Nunu Wako, Political Analyst, Kone Feseha of the Ethiopian Dialogue Forum, and from Los Angeles, Elias Wondimu, CEO of Tsehai Publishers. Thanks to our affiliate relations, along with our viewers and listeners. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next, and tomorrow morning is Daybreak.